other queer films tend to lean into stereotypes, cliches, and tragedy, the Todd Haynes 2015 film Carol proves to be a prime example of revolutionary queer cinema. The film lets the two female lead characters simply exist as they are, lesbians in a relationship. While there are struggles present with the characters in the screenplay, which slightly differs from its source material, it is not centered solely with them figured out who they are. It only focuses on the timeline of their relationship. The time period in which it takes place also adds an element of tension that wouldn't exist if the film took place in a more modern setting. The film follows Carol Aird, a glamorous woman in the midst of a separation and a custody battle over her daughter, and Therese Belivet, a younger woman who Carol meets at a department store where Therese works while she tries to become a photographer. Throughout the film, the relationship between the two grows as they spend time together and travel. What feels the most impactful to me as a queer film is the fact that neither character grapples with their sexuality. They let the relationship grow and progress from their immediate connection at the department store to what ends up as romantic. One of the reasons I wanted to continue to push on and try to get the film made was because of the very first sense upon reading the novel that there's an extraordinary forward-thinking about Highsmith's position on everything from the coming-out tale to the lack of psychologizing about the state of one's sexuality to what makes a good mother. All of those things are what really make that novel astonishing still today. Carol took nearly 20 years to make, and a timeline like this isn't uncommon for LGBT films, especially those focused on lesbians. Queer as a politics has not resolved lesbian invisibility. There exists still, as within the heterosexual film world of the film industry, an inequality of funding for lesbian filmmakers as opposed to gay filmmakers. Hayward goes on to wonder if the success of the 1993 film Philadelphia, a movie that follows a gay man and his HIV status, would have had the same obstacles such as funding if it were about lesbians instead of a gay man. Screenwriter Phyllis Nagy spoke about the struggle to get films like this funded. People who finance films about lesbians are often straight white men. Many times I had to do a little song and dance about how what is extraordinary about this project is a lack of such logic. And would you ever expect that kind of logic now from a gay male film that you were producing? In some bizarre way, we've moved beyond it to a certain extent in films about gay men, and gay men are allowed to be hatched from an egg, just be gay. But lesbians require a very particular sort of self-reflection, which nobody I know has actually ever gone through. Where other queer films might focus on a lesbian struggle with her own sexuality, Carol's does not do this and instead just tells a love story between two women. What I believe helps make the film so successful and ultimately feel more authentically queer is the fact that queer people worked on the movie. The author of the novel that the film was based on, Patricia Highsmith, along with Nagy, identify as lesbians, and the director Haynes identifies as gay. New queer cinema was a term coined in the 1992 Village Voice article by B. Ruby Rich to describe the renaissance in gay and lesbian filmmaking represented by the Americans, including Todd Haynes. If the film was in the hands of people who were not queer, then it is possible that the relationship between Therese and Carol would have been shown in a completely different light. Haynes' attention to detail serves not as verisimilitude, but rather the image of a historical moment, in this case the 1952 before post-war prosperity painted Americans' aspirations in full garish technicolor. Haynes was able to portray the relationship between the two in a sensitive way as told through the directing choices that he made, such as focusing on the unspoken affection and longing between them versus objectifying them. The time period that this film takes place also makes a huge part in the characters and their motivation. Set on the East Coast in the 1950s, Carol is a mother going through a custody battle, while Therese is a young aspiring photographer. Carol dealing with separation and a custody battle was not fully uncommon for the time, but it was not the norm. Between 1950 and 1990, the divorce rate doubled from 11 to 23 divorcees per 1,000 married women between the ages of 18 and 64. Therese is going through her own struggles, adjusting to adulthood while dealing with her own career aspirations and lackluster relationship. Carol and Therese's friendship turned relationship simply existed without the internal struggle from either of them and could have been seen as normal and accepted had one of them been a man. Nagy rejected frequent suggestions that Carol or Therese should feel guilty about being gay and suffer some kind of breakdown scene about it. Have you ever had a breakdown about being straight? She would reply. Much of what is shown between the relationship of Carol and Therese relies on what is being shown through the subject, interpretations of their body language, or the moments they spend without each other and the secrecy and yearning that comes from it. This adaptation focuses on Carol and the issues she has with her separation and the custody battles, but also gives life to Therese as a character, something that the novel doesn't do much of. What the audience is given instead is Therese's desire with which to identify. Carol is the name of her obsession, so the film's initially disappointingly bland title refers empathetically to both women to subject and object of desire. Gaining in the direct embrace of the lesbian desire what it loses in pulpy portent. The title of the book that the film was based on, The Price of Salt, but it was later changed to Carol when it was republished. Most lesbian stories during the 1950s were pulp paperbacks that conformed to the moral code of the era by sentencing their characters to suicide or homosexual conversion in the final chapter. Salt is often cited as the first lesbian novel with a happy ending. By changing the title from that to Carol shifts the expectation of the film from being a typical racy pulp lesbian story that ends in tragedy to a story that focuses on Carol herself. If the movie was made by people who were not queer, it is possible that Carol and Therese could have been sexualized and they could have become victims to the male gaze. Hayward makes the connection between the uptick in criticism of pornographic scenes and how it may have been an effective queer theory. In queer theory and cinema, the gaze as well as questions of visual pleasure come under scrutiny if we think of pornography and the pleasure in viewing of the spectator, male or female, of the typical triad setup, which includes a lesbian scene or two to get things warmed, hotted up. Another queer movie that was released around the same time featuring two leads, Blue's Warmest Color, faced criticism and was questioned as even being a lesbian film for portraying the two leads through the gaze of its male director because of its rough sex scenes. Engaging with explicitly queer cinema with a happy ending, such as Carol, versus a film where a homosexual relationship might only exist in some homoerotic subtext or ends in tragedy, is an interesting experience. Many same-sex relationships in films are only thought of this way because the audience queer reads and relies on subtext. Carol breaks that cycle by letting the story between the two leads simply exist without falling into cliches or objectification. The nearly 20 years of production and work put in by queer people behind the scenes, from the novel through the adaptation, qualifies it as great storytelling, and it is groundbreaking to see lesbians portrayed with depth and avoiding objectification, all while getting to have what any other heterosexual couple has in cinema, the honor to simply exist. Queer cinema challenges the view that homosexuality and lesbianism must have value ascribed to it. Good or bad, it just is.